Reading with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, jambo, bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Jadley, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We are coming to you from the beautiful neighborhood of Reedville in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. Our mission is to help inspire you to grow closer together with your family by reading more. We are so delighted that you're part of our beautiful Reading with Your Kids family. Please be sure to subscribe to the show on the iHeartRadio app, on Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Spotify, Ghana, Himalaya, wherever you find your podcast. This episode is a special episode honoring the life and times of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And we're doing that by republishing our interview with Nic Stone, celebrating her middle grade novel, Dear Martin. Right now, please welcome to the show, Nic Stone.
Dear Martin, my name is Justice McAllister, and I'm a 17-year-old high school senior. I'm ranked 4th in my class. I'm the captain of the debate team. I scored a 15-16 and a 34 on the SAT and ACTs, respectively. And despite growing up in a bad area, I have a future ahead of me that will likely include an Ivy League education and a career in public policy. Sadly, during the wee hours of this morning, none of that mattered. Long story short, I tried to do a good deed and wound up in handcuffs. And despite the fact that my ex-girl was visibly drunk off her ass, excuse my language, I apparently looked so menacing in my prep school hoodie, the cop who cuffed me called for backup. By the time they let me go, the sun was coming up. It changed me. I don't want to go around looking for problems, but I know I can't continue to pretend everything's fine. Yeah, there are no more colored water fountains, but if I can be forced to sit on the concrete in too tight cuffs when I've done nothing wrong, it's clear there's an issue. That's why I'm writing to you. You faced way worse stuff than sitting in cuffs for a few hours, but you stuck to your guns. Well, to your lack thereof, actually. I want to try to live like you. Do what you would do. See where it gets me. Sincerely, Justice.
Joining us on the line right now from a city I love, beautiful Atlanta, Georgia, where they're just recovering from 4 or 5 inches of snow. I know that my friends in Maine, that's not a big deal, but in Atlanta, let me tell you, 5 inches of snow in Atlanta, that's a problem. So, please welcome to the show the author of a brand new YA titled Dear Martin, Nic Stone. Nic, how are you?
Hi, I'm great. Unfortunately, still recovering from the 5 inches of snow. Atlanta is so pitiful. These things.
Yes, Nic was telling me she gets stuck in Albany, New York, because it was snowing in Atlanta.
Yeah. Like, what even? I don't even know.
Well, congratulations on Dear Martin. It's your first published novel.
It is, yes.
That must be exciting for you.
Yeah, it is. It's exciting.
Yeah, wonderful. So give us the sort of thumbnail details about Dear Martin.
So Dear Martin it's a young adult novel, like you mentioned. It follows a 17-year-old African-American boy named Justice, who, after a traumatic experience with racial profiling, there's a night that he's trying to help his ex-girlfriend get home after she's had too much to drink. She's trying to drive her car. He's trying to prevent her from driving her car. Mm-hmm. And in the process of him doing what he perceives as a good deed, a police officer pulls up to the scene, assumes that Justice is doing something wrong, and arrests him on the spot without giving him a chance to, even explain what was going on. Mm-hmm. As a response to this incident, Justice starts this journal of letters that he writes to the late Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., more or less to see if Dr. King's teachings hold up here in the 21st century. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I don't want you to give away the ending, but I'm guessing it's not a slam dunk, that not everything that Dr. King wrote about might be holding up in terms in Justin's eyes. Justice's eyes.
Justice. Yeah. You know what? It's interesting. I decided to write this novel because I kept seeing people quote Dr. King kind of in opposition to some of the nonviolent protest movements happening now, like the Black Lives Matter movement. We've got the Take a Knee thing going on Sundays at football games. Mm-hmm. And these are all forms of nonviolent protest. But I've seen people quote Dr. King the literal king of nonviolent protest in opposition to these things. So I really wanted to explore, like, this notion of, like, what would he say and what would he do if he were alive today, to see some of the problems that we still have going on here in the United States in regard to race relations. So, yeah, no spoilers, but it is not as simple as I think people would assume based on what we've been taught over the years about Dr. King and his legacy. So, you know, no easy answers.
No, well, and there isn't any easy answers. And I have to tell you, it's, you know, I'm approaching 100 years old. And but I mean, this has been an issue that we've been dealing with and struggling with throughout my entire life. And, I'm really tired of it. I mean, I think we definitely need to struggle. What I'm tired with is that we need to struggle with this.
Yeah.
And, it doesn't seem, I just don't understand it. I mean, I'm not perfect by any means, and I certainly have my faults, but I would hope to think that I'm kind of old, you know, have learned to deal with people and to, accept them and to not prejudge them. I know that our society hasn't reached that point yet.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting because, you know, what was accomplished during the civil rights movement in the 50s and 60s, you had all of these amazing things going on, that they were a source of upheaval, honestly, in our society. And I think we sometimes get the idea that, like, oh, if it's nonviolent, it won't cause any kind of disorder. But, like, honestly, the opposite is true. And what people were able to accomplish in the 50s and 60s was legislation. So, like, we have legislation now. We have laws that they don't necessarily prevent discrimination. Like, it's technically illegal to discriminate. Of course, it doesn't stop people from doing it. But what the laws mean is the laws mean that a person who is discriminated against can sue the person who discriminated against them. But that's not something that really, like, affects kind of like the heart or affects people's perspectives. It's just like, oh, well, if I don't want to get sued, let me make sure that I don't openly hate this person of color or who is gay or, you know, all of the areas where a person can be discriminated against. Like, let me make sure that I don't openly discriminate against them so that they won't sue me. But that doesn't change people's hearts. So I feel like now we kind of have to get to a place where we're open with each other, we're talking with each other, and we're open to being wrong. I mean, the only way to really change paradigms and to kind of shift the status quo, which is what's going to have to happen in order for this to not be an issue anymore, people are going to have to be open to being wrong about what they believe about other people. And they're going to have to be open to admitting that there are things inside of them that they believe about other people that maybe aren't very kind. I do think that it's important that we acknowledge that implicit bias is just, you know, it doesn't mean you're a horrible person. It just means you're a product of your environment. And that's something that I think it's important for us to recognize, like the environment that we live in here in America, that we have all grown up in. If we are here in America and we have been here most of or all of our lives, there are very specific things that are kind of embedded in the foundations of our society that become a part of our psyche just as a result of us growing up here. So, you know, being willing to think about that and talk about that and dig those nasty, ugly things up, like, I think that's really where we're going to have to start to move forward from where we are now.
Do you think we're ready for that? Nic will be back in just a moment to tell us what she thinks and if she thinks our nation is ready to take that hard look. But first, I would love it if you would take, well, not so much of a hard look, but take a look at my picture book called The Great Maritini. The Great Maritini tells the story of Sam. Sam is an aspiring but a little clumsy magician. He makes a lot of mistakes on stage, and that's actually a lot of fun to see. He also learns that the greatest magic trick of all is transforming feelings of caring into action to help another human being. The Great Maritini has been called one of the top books that teaches kids kindness by childrenspublishing.com and has also received Story Monster approval. We would love to have your approval as well. If you go to our website, greatmaritini.com, you can find out about our giant bilingual English-Spanish edition of the book. If you purchase the bilingual edition at greatmaratini.com, your child will receive a free magic kit. And they'll also be helping the rebuilding effort down in Puerto Rico. That's greatmaratini.com. Do you think we're ready for that? Given that we've, been kind of needing to do this for, decades.
I don't know that we'll ever be ready. Mm-hmm. I say this also as a parent. I remember reading all the books, and before I have 2 kids. Before I had the first one, I read all of the books and I did all of the research. But then once that kid is there, it's like a whole different ball game. And I feel like it's going to be a similar thing. We're going to have to go through the pain of transition. And honestly, I feel like we are going through the pain of transition now, because you have a lot of things shifting. For example, the election in Alabama, the Senate race in Alabama from a couple days ago, for the first time in, I'm not going to say the number of years because I don't want to get it wrong, but for the first time in a long time, you have a Democrat in the Senate in Alabama. That is a huge deal. But if you look at, you look at the voter breakdown, it's because of all of the black voters. The black voters were the ones who kind of ushered this guy into office, and he won by a very small margin. But those kinds of changes are going to be uncomfortable. And I think that we have to just kind of learn how to adjust. I think of the status quo as a form of societal gravity, if you will allow me a second to be kind of a nerd. But gravity, the way gravity functions, it keeps our feet rooted to the ground, and all of us, it keeps us rooted to the ground. And so we've learned how to move, how to walk, how to wave our arms, any kind of motion we do without thinking about gravity, but, with gravity in mind, because if we weren't used to gravity, we wouldn't be able to move. If gravity were to change at all, if it were to get more intense or less intense, we'd all have to learn how to move again in a way that we don't hurt ourselves. And I think of the status quo as the same thing. The status quo is this thing that nobody really thinks about very often, but it's what kind of keeps the wheels turning, keeps the cogs of society moving. And once we try to shift that and change that, it's going to shake up the way everybody has to function. And that is going to be uncomfortable. But I mean, it's necessary, I think, it's about time that we start making these changes and looking at these problems. And I feel like we're in a very uncomfortable place in history, but I do think that hopefully, 20 years from now, we'll look back at how tumultuous things are, but we'll be able to say, okay, but look where we are now. We're in a better place. Things are more equitable, and people are kinder to each other, maybe, hopefully.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I am hopeful because I was alive, when Dr. King made his famous "I Have a Dream" speech. And in fact, a few years ago, that tour through Atlanta that we were talking about before we started our conversation here, one of the people who was with us, we had a young Italian student with us for that journey, and we stopped in Washington, D.C., and I think it was the 50th anniversary of that speech, and they were setting up, and we were there the day before, and so they're setting up for the ceremony, and we actually stood on the spot where Dr. King gave that address, and I was sharing with both my daughter and this Italian student how I felt listening to that as a 10-year-old, and sitting with my parents and talking about it, and was really impressed that both of my parents are like, yeah, this is great. And that wasn't a sentiment that was shared around my neighborhood necessarily. And, and I look and I see things have changed. When I'm presenting my educational magic shows at schools, it's very rare for me to go into a place and see just a sea of white faces or a sea of black faces. I see rainbows at almost every school I visit right now, and that certainly wasn't the case when I was going to school.
Yeah. And I'm glad that you said that, because I think it's important for us to see the rainbows. A lot of the places I go, I wind up kind of unpacking this idea of color blindness, because for a long time, I've heard this word kind of tossed around that like we should be colorblind, you know, even for over the past, like until about 5 years ago, I kept hearing people toss out this word post-racial. We live in this post-racial society, but like, obviously that's not true, right? Mm-hmm. But the idea of being colorblind, like I kind of wanted to like burn up and die. Because the truth is, I want people to notice that I am a black woman. I want people to see other people's color, because when you do that, you're also acknowledging that other people have experiences that differ from yours, you know? Because like it or not, things are not equal. Like things aren't equitable for everyone in this country. People are not equally liked. And I'm talking based on how they look even. Like people aren't equally respected. And so I think it's important that we continue to see color and we continue to acknowledge the beautiful differences because there's nothing wrong with being different. We just have to learn how to treat each other with respect despite those differences.
Absolutely. And you know, one of the things that I love talking to authors about is especially authors of middle grade and YA titles, because you know, with the name of the podcast, Reading with Your Kids, a lot of people assume it's, you're just talking about books you cuddle up on the couch and read together. But that's not the case, because we can read with our kids, whether it's on the couch at the same time or reading a book like Dear Martin simultaneously and then talking about it at the dinner table or on the way to school. One of the things I ask a lot of YA authors is, what kind of discussions can you have? Well, we've just had some of those discussions here today. You know, we come from very, very different worlds. We're obviously very different at different points in our lives with different ages. And we've experienced this issue in different ways. And, I think these are some of the same kind of discussions that parents and kids can have reading Dear Martin.
Yeah, absolutely. And like, I mean, the way I structured this book, there are chunks of the book that are in pure dialogue. So you have these classroom scenes where the scene is written as a name, a colon, and then what the character is saying. I'm like colon hyphen, which is a colon. It's definitely a colon. But it's written with no commentary. There's no exposition. There are no dialogue tags. And I wrote it that way because I wanted to just present the different perspectives without commentary from me as the author. And I think that these conversations, hopefully, and I've heard this because I visit a lot of schools, and it's like the best part of this job. I can't even tell you. But a lot of these students are telling me that those conversations in the book are helping them have conversations with their friends. And I honestly think it could also help parents have conversations with their children. And also, I highly recommend audiobooking, especially like with young adult and middle grade stuff, because there's something really powerful about even listening to the same book with your kid. Like you and your kids are listening to a book in the car, that kind of thing. I'm a very, very, very big advocate of reading with your children and, you know, talking about what you're reading. It's awesome. Yeah,
it is. It's so powerful. And especially like with a book like Dear Martin. And we're seeing, you mentioned, you know, the Take a Knee and the Black Lives Matter, and all these things are going around us. And it might be something that parents and children, are a little bit nervous about talking about, because it's, I don't want to say the wrong thing. I don't want to get this person mad at me. But if we're talking about Dear Martin and the characters and what's going on in Dear Martin, well, then we're not actually sharing our own view. You know, it's a little less threatening.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's the beauty of books to me, you know, like storytelling kind of revealed itself to me as a way to get people to listen without interrupting. So like I get to put my perspective out there, and the person who's reading is absorbing it, honestly, without even realizing that they're absorbing it. But the beauty also of books is that you can confront other people's emotions without fear. Like a book can't bite you, it can't hit you, it can't yell at you, it can't strike out at you. So even if you're reading a book full of someone else's anger, like, you'll be okay. Like, it's not going to injure you in any way. And I'm thankful for some of the books kind of on the market now that are way different than books that were being published before, because we're getting to look into other people's lives and into the stuff that they deal with and into their emotions and how they respond to things and how they react to the world around them. And it's so powerful to me because, I mean, honestly, it's the best way to build empathy.
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. And there's so, we touched on this earlier, that we are living in a rainbow world right now, and there's so many beautiful things that people bring to our lives. And there's so many differences, whether it's racial or ethnic or even just living in different parts of the country. One of the things that happened in Atlanta is I go around and part of my show with high school kids is to bring somebody up on stage and ask them, is it okay if I ask the audience to tell me some things that you're good at, some of your talents? And it's a little risky. People think I'm crazy for asking that. No one's ever said anything inappropriate. It's wonderful. Kids, if you give them high expectations, they live up to it. But yep. I had this young woman up on stage, and I said, can someone tell me what she's good at, what she has great skills at? And someone raised their hand, and they said, she's a good shot. And coming from the north, from Boston, I said, oh, you're a great basketball player, huh? Great, wonderful. You can shoot and they go, no, she's a great shot. With a gun? Really? I said, but you're a girl. But it was just complete. I'm like, okay. And it just pointed out that, even though we're living in the same country, it's very different cultures.
Yep.
Yeah, cool.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Speaking of different cultures, one of the things, I just want to touch on it, one of the things that you did with Justice is you had him in a private school. Was there a reason for that?
Well, I mean, honestly, so my background, I went to public school, but I was always the only black kid in my classes.
Okay.
And I was also poor. So I was like the poor black kid in my classes. And the way, so, in public schools, I don't know, I'm guessing this is probably still the case, but there's this kind of stratification of classes based on perceived level of cognition is how I like to put it, like kind of euphemistically, but basically you have like your college prep classes. When I was in school, you had college prep, you had honors, and then you had gifted honors and AP, right? So gifted honors and AP, those are the classes that I was in, and I was always the only black kid. Mm-hmm. If I wasn't the only one, there was maybe one more. And the interesting thing is there's this intersection between socioeconomics and class level, because at my school, the kids in my classes were also the kids at the highest income brackets in school. Mm-hmm. So my high school, Norcross High School, at that point, and I think still, it was one of the most socioeconomically diverse high schools in the state. So you had kids who only ate when they came to school because they didn't have food at home, and then you had kids who drove BMWs to school, like literally across the spectrum. And I had all the BMW kids in my classroom, while my life was more akin to like one of the other, like the opposite end. Mm-hmm. So I chose to do this kind of private school setting, honestly, to exacerbate that.
Okay.
I wanted to really draw out the intersections between race and socioeconomics and show that like a kid who is from a lower socioeconomic background can thrive academically, but still be dealing with all of these kind of things because of his race. Mm-hmm. And it also gave me an opportunity to juxtapose a rich black kid and a poor black kid, because Justice is the poor black kid, but his best friend Manny, there's a scene where one of the white kids in class, actually he's kind of the lead antagonist, I'll say, his name is Jared, but Jared points out that Manny's parents, this other black kid, his parents make more money than Jared's parents do. So you have this, so basically what I was trying to do with the private school is show the range of experiences, amongst African Americans, because, not all African Americans are from the hood.
Right.
Not all African Americans are poor and grow up on food stamps. We all have very different experiences, but at the same time, we also tend to share experiences when it comes to racism. So showing these opposite ends of the spectrum, but having racism be this thing that kind of connects these two boys, it was a very important thing for me to do. And honestly, the use of a private school was the best way for me to do it.
Well, I'm just fascinated. I I love that you've done this, and I thank you for creating Dear Martin. I think it's a wonderful opportunity for families, for kids, for our country, to step back and take a look at what's going on, where we are, and where we want to go to. Mm-hmm. Yeah. What's next for Nic Stone? This can't be, you're such a home run right out of the gate. What's going to come up next?
I have another book coming out in October of 2018. And I actually just sold 2 more books, so 2019 and 2020. So I've got 3 more lined up already. I'm not allowed to say too much about them, but I will say that the next book is way different from Dear Martin, and yet not at all. Like, it's not a race book, but it does deal with some very intense and, like, confusing things that teenagers go through as teenagers. And it's really, it follows three kids as they try to kind of navigate the intersections between love and friendship. Friendship and romance, like, do I like my best friend as more than a friend, like that kind of stuff, while also juggling their identities and, like, figuring out, like, who it's okay to love. Like, I'm a girl, is it okay for me to like this girl? And I'm a girl who typically likes girls. What does it mean if I'm feeling this way about a guy? Like, there's all of these different identity questions that the second book brings up. And it's the book that I needed when I was in high school, asking those questions of myself. So I'm glad that we are living in a time where I had the opportunity to write it, and that, I'm glad it will be published, because clearly it didn't exist when I was 16.
Absolutely. Wow, this is exciting. Nic, where can folks connect with you online?
Yes, so my website is Nic Stone, NICSTONE.info. And then I'm on Instagram and Twitter at GetNicked, GetNicced.
Excellent. Well, Nic Stone, the author of Dear Martin, definitely need to check out this book, Dear Martin. And Nic Stone, I'm so happy that you joined us today, and I really look forward to you coming back to tell us about your next book.
Thank you, and thank you for having me.
Please be sure to join us for the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Our guest will be Jen Moon Spalding. She'll be here to celebrate her beautiful picture book series, The Adventures of Lily. That's the next episode of the podcast. Want to thank the folks who made today's show so wonderful. Of course, want to thank our guest, Nic Stone. Be sure to check out Dear Martin and also all of the books by Nic Stone. Really, really fantastic, powerful, thought-provoking author. Also want to thank my team, Alejandra Doherty, Fatima Khan. Want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. Most of all, I want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. And as always, thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.